Okay, well, this panel this morning, which we're going to take until 10:30, including discussion, so we won't lose a lot of time. Uh, and maybe even a little bit longer because we're going to talk a little bit about next steps. But Jaleisha and I put this panel together. He said, after all of this information that we share, why not bring three of the most brilliant people we can think of and have them imagine what should our next steps be for reproductive justice, for dealing with reproductive and genomic technologies. But what is the power and potential of Black women imagining these things and stuff? And so that's the point of this conversation. We're going to start off with Dr. Sidney Curtis with the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice and a visiting professor here at Smith College, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, instructor.
All right. We're so lucky. And then that's going to be followed by Monica Simpson, the executive director of the SisterSong Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective. All right, SisterSong. And if y'all know about Let's Talk About Sex, you need to let us know. Hurry up. Right. Okay. And then, of course, the one and only Paris Hatcher, who is the founder of Black Feminist Future. And I just think that nobody better than these three women can project us into not the 21st century, but the 22nd. Let's go that far ahead of the world we want and how we're going to get there. So why don't we start with you, Sydney?
Okay. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. I'm Dr. Sidney Curtis, and I currently work as Training Institute Director at the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice. We're based in New Orleans, Louisiana. I teach at Smith over the summer in a pre-college program called Women, Gender, and Representation, and my course is called Rest as Resistance, Black Feminism, and Radical Interiority. So Loretta's remarks this morning brought a tear to my eye because I'm like, we are legitimate in our 23rd century vision of rest and of radical divestment. It needs to be charged.
The microphone needed rest.
Okay, rest. They're there. Thank you. In our radical vision of divestment from capitalism through revoking our labor, mental, emotional, physical, and through radical rest. But today I'm here to talk more specifically about reproductive justice and environmental justice, which I'm really excited to highlight because if we're casting ourselves very far into the future, right now, it's a hopeless moment for that exercise, at least to me, because of the rollbacks in environmental protections and the just stark evidence in our daily lives, in our communities of environmental harm coming for all of us through extreme heat, through other extreme weather events like flooding. As the planet warms, our atmosphere can hold more water, and that means worse floods, worse snowstorms, in the rainy season and extreme heat in the dry season, which has already claimed countless lives. It's a very bleak time. But if we are dreaming ourselves into the 23rd century, I just want to talk about a little bit of the history of the environmental justice movement and ways that I think a Black feminist lens and Black feminist organizing can propel us and, in fact, as has been said, continue the tradition of Black women saving ourselves and our planets through solidarity, especially with Indigenous communities and through principled organizing. So I'll be talking a bit more about those principles after I talk about the background. So again, I'm Dr. Curtis. I got my PhD at Loyola University Chicago in higher education. So I'm trained in curriculum and instruction in post-secondary education. I come to this as an educator. and as an organizer. So while in Chicago, I worked with the Coalition to Defund the Chicago Police Department. And there I was exposed to Black queer feminist organizing, which I believe are the principles that we can take forward at a local level to save ourselves and our communities and our planet from this climate crisis. Let's see. I came into the reproductive justice space through a focus on Black women's maternal health in connection with the AFIA Center. Shout out AFIA Center, always in Dallas, Texas, where we have some of the worst Black women's maternal health outcomes in the country and therefore the world. So we are in a crisis on many fronts, and I understand my purpose, burgeoning purpose, is to make those connections between these interlocking crises and the Black queer feminist solutions that I perceive. I have to shout out Dr. Beverly Wright, the founder of the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice. She is my mentor, she is my boss, but she is a pioneer who, like many of our nonprofit and community-based organization leaders, is unsung, undercited, and overlooked in this space. So her white and male counterparts are being lauded as the fathers of environmental justice, but she has been doing this work in the Louisiana Petrochemical Corridor, also known as Cancer Alley, for over 30 years, for longer than I've been alive. And her work as a organizer, but also as a scholar and a proud HBCU graduate, which if we want to talk about the future of in the 23rd century, I believe that our HBCUs will be that site of liberatory knowledge production that will see us through. So I have to shout that out as I learn more about the foundations of our movements from the past and how HBCUs will play a role in our movements in the future. So Dr. Beverly Wright founded the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice, as I said, in the New Orleans, Louisiana area and in the what's called the river parishes in the petrochemical corridor. So this is what is known as a sacrifice zone, whereby the communities of mostly poor and Black people living there are expected to bear the brunt of disproportionate contamination due to petrochemical and fossil fuel production coming from the Mississippi River. New Orleans is a legendary port city, and all of those many decades of industry have poisoned thoroughly the air, water, and soil. There are disproportionate rates of cancer, maternal mortality, low birth weight, and just a host of other RJ issues that this community is facing. But they have been organizing as environmental justice community leaders. And like many of our life-saving movements, they are marginalized coming from the South. So how many of our social justice movements, for lack of a better word, have started with Black communities in the South? And if we're thinking about how we're going to survive this, I think that their grassroots work is where we need to look for those possibility models and to support literal life-saving organizing. Another example of this is in Warren County, North Carolina, considered the birthplace of the modern environmental justice movement. So what I want to highlight here is the extremely localized impetus for EJ that I'm encountering as something that is, it is germane to the air, water, and soil where you live and where your loved ones live and where the most marginalized people in your community live. So again, in 1982 in Warren County, North Carolina, residents of a predominantly Black community resisted the state's plan to establish a hazardous waste landfill, physically putting their bodies in front of the trucks coming in with this contaminated soil filled with cancer-causing PCB chemicals. So these residents were supported by civil rights organizations, but like with many of these movements, despite that protest, the landfill was created anyway. A contemporary example is Standing Rock. So 2016-17, the water protectors organized, and the Dakota Access Pipeline has been active for 8 years now. So EJ is a movement of hyper-localized bodies on the line in its origins, but if you look at it on its face, there are many L's taken. And yet there's an understanding within EJ that this is a multi-generational effort, that we likely will not see the outcomes that we need to see to reverse this in our lifetimes. But as with, again, some of our most impactful movements of the 20th century, it's old Southern Black people who have organized their church, who have organized their rural community to continue to put their bodies on the line. Even beyond that, so wins have been gained, but there was a lot of emphasis in the EJ movement on getting the federal government to react. So the Warren County protests led to the establishment of the Environmental Justice Office at the EPA, but we have seen in the last month, with a stroke of a pen, how those decades of organizing aimed at getting the federal government to provide funding, which happened. That was a huge victory through the Inflation Reduction Act. It can be taken away. So it's not to characterize the whole situation as an L, but rather to, I think EJ lays bare the challenges and the lifelong struggle that we face, and the ways that these organizers continue to fight. So I hope that provides a really extremely abbreviated background. There are 17 principles of environmental justice. I won't recite them, but if you want to look up the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit held in 1991, this movement and RJ, I have found in my research, are very parallel. So what I'm excited about is to be speaking about these intersections, because there are some things that the leadership of the EJ movement has prioritized that I don't think will be the solutions for us to see see the 23rd century. Okay. So this is where I start to think about Black feminist ecological thought and the notion of our inherent relationship with what I'm still trying to figure out how I want to call it. Is it Mother Earth, the natural world? The more than human is a common phrasing. So with the inherent relationship that we share to the more than human life world, we are the best positioned to resist Cartesian dualism and that extractivist, carceral, colonial, imperial logic that says the natural world is for ours to extract what we need. Rather, we understand the harms of that, having lived firsthand. And I think that RJ has a lot to share about resisting patriarchy that leaders of the EJ movement need to hear and receive in order to center the voices and experiences of those most affected, which are Black women and their families and their children, through that third tenet of RJ. So when we think about our specific positionality and our ancestral knowledge, I feel so free to speak about spirituality now, because that is, for me, the coalitional thread for building our movement base to bring more people into this interconnected struggle. But it is also the very practical survival strategy as far as how we face down what is truly the end of our natural world and continue to fight this fight over multiple generations and facilitate intergenerational healing. So I won't talk too much about spirituality because it's been covered, but that is one of the core and primary aspects of how this work, I think, will be carried out. A few other aspects. Black queer feminist organizing. So Charlene Carruthers wrote a book, I think in 2021. Charlene is the previous leader of the Black Youth Project 100, which is a international, I understand, organization of Black youth, specifically between the ages, I think, of like 18 to 35. And I think Paris is a perfect person to expound on the organizing community and these principles. But 3 core principles that will lead grassroots organizing to continue this fight are: 1, building strong leaders. So elevating a leadership model that is not top down, that encourages multiple people to have a stake in this fight and to center themselves. So, what is your personal commitment to this? And this tenet reflects the Black feminist ethics of care. So, my scholar hat comes on, and I'm like, well, Patricia Hill Collins said that our lived experience is not only valid for knowledge production, but it is the most important aspect of narrative that we have to work with and to organize from. We have empathy, we have personal expressiveness, and we have the value of affect and the centrality of emotion to guide our decision making and to order our steps. So this, if we can foster that in enough people, we're building an affirmed coalition of multiple strong leaders in this fight. Second principle is of Black queer feminist organizing, which I think is the kind of organizing I would like to see our EJ leaders adopt, is to adopt healing justice as a core value and principle. So this means navigating and going, not running from, but running toward those instances of having to facilitate healing from interpersonal harm and violence within the movement. So as we broaden and build this tent, there are going to be some serious instances of harm between those of us who are all becoming those many strong leaders. And we would do well to, as Loretta has said in recent work, call people in rather than out. And there's many ways of thinking about and framing that, but at the end of the day, it's extremely hard work to continue to organize with those who have violated some aspect of our principles. But if we adopt healing justice as a core framework, we continue that Black feminist coalition and base building. Very much easier said than done. Bell Hooks, though, said it very well. We cannot fully create effective movements for social change if individuals struggling for that change are not also self-actualized or working towards that end. When wounded individuals come together in groups to make change, our collective struggle is often undermined by all that has not been dealt with emotionally. So this is a Black feminist and a queer Black feminist principle for centering emotions and not discarding those people who we need their contributions. And there's more to say about this that I'm just not hitting it right, but we cannot have an exclusive movement if we're going to not break our link in the chain. And lastly, and this is an important one, I think, for environmental justice in particular, especially as someone who is new to the space and is learning more about the science and everything, we have to combat liberalism with principled struggle. So Black queer feminist organizing is in the Black radical tradition, the tradition of the Black Panthers and many other organizations that made no compromises. We cannot collude with the state. We cannot center state-sponsored solutions. So the EPA, once again, was a core factor in the organizing of my EJ for mothers. And we have seen, at least for me, how quickly that was faulty. And in fact, the projects that we have been struggling against, many of them go forward anyway. So what does it look like to take a really hyper-localized and grassroots approach to combat liberal solutions, things like if we had all voted, that there would be a real solution? I would say that the emphasis on democracy as more than a process, but like as an outcome, is one that I would characterize as a false solution when it comes to interrupting the climate crisis. So we need our relations to be strengthened at a more interpersonal level, which is why I've been speaking about these ethics of care, so that we're not putting our hopes in a system, and a state-sponsored system at that. Scientifically, some of the false solutions to avoid are things like nuclear energy, the idea that we can geoengineer the sun rays to not beam down on Earth, but to beam them back up to the sun. Carbon capture, so when your airline says that they have offset the carbon from all of our travel here, rather than try and shield ourselves from our complicity, it's important to just do that internal math and calculus with our own lifestyles and decision making. Yes, there are no individual solutions to the climate crisis. You won't hear me tell you to recycle, but it's important not to fool ourselves into believing that a democratic coalition or the right scientific breakthrough is going to change the extractive and colonial logics that have led to this crisis in the first place. And as Black feminists, I believe we know this very well. It's just about doing that really hard internal work, which is where spirituality comes in to support us in continuing this fight and continuing to heal ourselves and others so that we can be on the front lines. And I think lastly, I just want to lift up a couple of wins because there are wins in this work. Southern Sector Rising is a environmental justice organization in Dallas, led by a woman named Marsha Johnson, who has been fighting. One other thing I wanted to say is identify your unit of change. So when we are in an organizing space and we're working with our comrades, having a specific target. So in my organizing with CPD, it was Stop Shot Spotter. We want to end the city's contract with gunshot detection technology. And, that was an eye-opening moment for me of like within the whole defund conversation, we have zeroed in on this one aspect of interrupting a false solution to community violence, which would be gunshot detection technology. In the climate justice world, a common unit of change is the permit. And zoning regulations, which again is extremely localized and municipal. Are Black residents zoned next to manufacturing plants? That is something that local city councils can change. They can rezone spaces. And we saw that happen with Southern Sector Rising, whereby Marsha Jackson worked for over 10 years to have essentially a landfill for old shingles and roof materials called Shingle Mountain that was zoned to be next to a residential community. And so this community had disproportionate rates of asthma and carcinogens in their air. There are community air monitoring projects that I want to lift up where people are doing citizen science to raise awareness about these issues and then advocate for that specific unit of change. So in our work, I think it's important to identify what that unit of change will be that we're organizing for and who the key stakeholders are, but we can talk more about that. And there's people in this room who know way more about that than I do. But she won. So just last month, after 10 years of organizing and pressuring the Dallas City Council, the Shingle Mountain was rezoned, and that area is now zoned as residential, and so that puts limits on what industry can do as far as manufacturing in that neighborhood. One last example that I want to close with, because I'm really excited. Last week I was at the 10th anniversary HBCU Climate Change Conference. And so this has been an exciting time for me to go from there to here and see the connections in real life. And there I met a young woman named Diamond Cunningham, finishing a PhD. She is the executive director of the Louisiana Abortion Fund. Support your local abortion fund. And she is doing a project whereby she is tracking the emissions of the pregnant people who she supports to travel out of state to access an abortion. So she is tracking how much emissions from her clients that it took to get them from Louisiana to Illinois, bless you. Whether that is by car or by plane, and how much carbon that emits into the air. And so this is just a concrete example of measuring the interconnected impacts of what may happen in the RJ space on our environmental justice fights, all to better identify that unit of change that we advocate and organize around. So I just want to close with that example because I think Black feminists are doing this work, and I think that we need to be in greater partnership with Indigenous communities. Because at this notion, and I get this from Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, Dr. Johnson, who you may have heard of, if our climate solutions do not have Indigenous people at the center, then they're false solutions too. So we have, I think, at least for me, a lot of rewiring to do in where I seek solutions from and what communities I consider the experts that will help us reverse this crisis. And finally, the principles that I and others organize around to maintain our fight through strengthened relations with one another, with the natural world. We can talk more about ecofeminism and how that is a frame that we can bring into the space and marry with RJ principles. But I'll stop there and let the more experienced organizers take over.
Well, peace, everybody. How y'all feeling this morning? All right, all right. Thank y'all for y'all's patience. And thank you, Dr. Jolly, for making sure I made it to the right building. God is good. But I'm really excited to be on this panel and to be able to be a part of this conversation. One, because I always love to learn from really brilliant people. And I know that every time I hear Paris, and I was excited to hear your brilliance on this because I'm always a seeker and learner of many different things. But also, I wanted to try to bring to you all something that is a different way of thinking about how we are able to move this RJ frame into the future, right? But I want to start because, again, I told y'all last night I'm a person of the church, so I have to start by giving my honors first, right? So first, I want to give honor to Shafia Monroe, grand midwife. She is a powerful Black midwife who has taught me so much about this work of birth justice that we now know as, but also just the practice and understanding of how to hold community in a particular kind of way. I was really honored to be one of her students at the International Center for Traditional Childbirth and become a full spectrum doula under her. Now, I do not practice my doula work, but I did not want to be in this movement without having that as a background for myself and knowing how to be in these conversations in a way that I felt was authentic in how I was talking about the work. So I have to give love to well, I call her Dr., but Shafia Monroe. Also, I want to give honor to midwife Jamara Amani. She is the midwife known for creating and building out the birth justice framework. I would never in any space not give her her honor for that and the work that she continues to move in that way. She is the director of the Southern Birth Justice Network. So if you all do not know that work, please tap in and please tap into the work of my powerful midwife, Jamara Amani. Also, I have to give love to the Black Mommas Matter Alliance. I am a founding member of this organization as well as a board member, and this is a coalition that is built and was built in order to be able to address the rising maternal mortality crisis in this country and to extend and expand the way that we think about birth justice and maternal health in all of its ways in this country. So I got to give love to those folks who are leading that work. And then lastly, I want to also give honor to the 12 mothers of the RJ framework. And the 12 mothers of this movement is their shoulders I stand on to do this work every single day. And I also want to be very clear, I am not a mama. Okay, I have not given birth to a child. I am a fine ass auntie all day, every day, but I am not a mama. But I come from a Black mama, Olinda, and she comes from a Black mama, Mabel, and so I do want to bring the energy and the ancestry that I'm a part of. But when I was thinking about what Loretta wanted me to talk about, and Black Mamas Matter, and, thinking about this reproductive justice frame and birth justice, as these frameworks and what is possible when we think about moving into the future with these frameworks that we've been given, my brain went into like 10 different directions, right? Of like how to move you all through this conversation. And I thought I wanted to start by moving into this conversation around expanding how we think about Black mamas. And I've always seen Black mothers in particular as the first feminists, as the first future Black futurists, right? Because you are choosing to allow your body to bring forth life into this world, and you don't know what that's going to do, but you've made this conscious decision to say yes to that and to create future in a particular kind of way. And I always have to give love to Paris too, because she was the first Black woman that ever really talks about Black feminism to me, as a little crazy raggedy organizer in North Carolina. But the more that she taught and the more that I followed her leadership in a lot of this work, I am very, very clear that my mama was a Black feminist. She would never say that, right? She never knew that language, but she was, and so was her mama and all the others, right? Because it's just something that is just in our spirits, in our soul, right? Of how we move and take care of community. But I also wanted to talk about this notion, because I think that in the reproductive justice frame, which I'm sure so many of you in this room understand and know what these tenets of reproductive justice are, right? The human right to be able to have the children in the ways that we want, to be able to prevent or end pregnancies, to be able to parent our children in healthy and safe environments, bodily autonomy. Like, we understand what this framework has given us, right, in RJ. But one of the things that I feel like we really had to expand on, right, when thinking about how do we want to include more people and more communities in this conversation of RJ, was how do we move from a very womb-centered space, right, that did, create some barriers for some communities, right, when thinking about seeing themselves reflected in this framework. And so I think that the way that I've been talking about reproductive justice, which I believe has been resonating with a lot of folks, is one, I've always seen mama in a very broad sense, right? So mama not necessarily being someone who just birthed children, but Black women have been birthing movements and concepts. We have birthed, so many different things, right? And so how do we create a world where we're able to allow our bodies to have the safety that it needs to be able to birth whatever that thing is that we want to bring into the world. And that has really been able to open this framework up for so many folks who may not feel that their path to liberation is connected to them, bringing a child into the world, but it may be them figuring out what they need to have the resources, access to the resources, I should say, to what they need to be able to birth whatever that thing is that they feel is inside of them and to bring that to the world, right? So I wanted to name that because as a person who hasn't had a child yet, I definitely still see this work so deeply connected to myself, regardless of the fact whether or not I've had a child. The other thing I wanted to bring in to kind of set the tone for this conversation today, too, is the way that I think about reproductive justice and birth justice as well is not only about these being powerful frameworks that have given us these definitions that we're able to organize and mobilize from, right? It takes me back to the quote from Audre Lorde that says we can't have single issue movements because we don't live single issue lives. And I think that both of these frameworks and the way that they were created by Black women allows us to be able to live into what I believe is the nature of what Audre Lorde was teaching us. But I also think that what these frameworks also did was create what I call a cultural intervention too, right? And so from a way of a person who comes into this movement, again, not from an academic space, but as an organizer, as a creative, I've always been trying to figure out what is it that RJ also gives us the ability to do beyond the organizing power of its framework that helps us think about how we get to the future. And, we know that we're in like the most extreme time of our lives. We talked about that last night, and our, living legends gave us a very clear picture of what that looks like, right? And what I think that what I'm excited about us thinking about when I think about the RJ frame is that even though we know that we're up against these policies that are being rolled back, taken out, taken us out in all the ways that they are, what we haven't tapped into enough is the power of the culture to be able to move us in a different direction, right? So what do I mean when I say like the power of the culture? So if you think about what the opposition did in terms of like where we are right now in this political moment, we saw an opposition that used narrative, that used stories, that used the media, right, and culture as its way of moving its work in a particular way, right, in a very, very, very scary way. Are y'all feeling me? Okay. And so what I feel like RJ gives us the ability to do is to think about how we do that differently within our own communities. So I also, there's two other folks I want to bring into the room who's helping me think about this. One is Bernice Reagan Johnson, right?
Yeah.
And one of the papers I read from her around collaboration, she talks a lot about like, you can't keep just talking to the same people and thinking that you are actually moving something, because you're not going to be doing that if you are not thinking about how radical you're making your tables and your spaces. The other person I want to bring in is Tony K. Bambara, who says that we have to make our movements irresistible, right? And what I don't think that I think that I don't want to frame this in a negative. I think we have a powerful opportunity now when thinking about the future of RJ to frame this work and to frame how we're talking about this work in a more radical way that allows more people to see themselves reflected, their stories reflected, and to be able to move it in a way so that people are actually talking about this work in a different kind of way. So I want to give you all an example of what I mean by that from a cultural intervention perspective. So we are working at SisterSong with our culture shift work on thinking about what our theory of change, of culture shift really, really means. Because I think this is a newer strategy that a lot of folks have not really caught a grasp of yet, right? I think a lot of people think when we say culture, we just mean throwing parties. It means that we just trying to hang out with really cool people, but that's not what this is. Honestly, if we really think about what RJ is as an actual framework, it is also a cultural intervention. So I want to give you all the definition that we're working on, that is framing that. Here it is, sorry. So the way that we're framing a cultural intervention is that a cultural intervention is an intentional action that challenges and disrupts the dominant power structures of the status quo with the goal of responding to the immediate needs of the community in order to move them towards action while offering healing and using joy as strategic resistance. Now, whenever we were really working through this and we were thinking about RJ as a framework and as a movement, it really started to shift us in thinking about not only is it a framework, not only is it a movement, it is a cultural intervention that has the power to move the people, right, in the ways that we need them to. So I want to give you all an example of like how this has worked for us in our work in terms of like using narrative and shifting in a particular kind of way. So how many folks have heard of the Trust Black Women framing at SisterSong, right? Yes. So this was a campaign that was developed in 2010. 9 Black women-led RJ organizations pulled this thing together, right? And we did that in response to not only crazy ass billboards that were going up all over the country, in particular in Georgia, starting in Georgia, saying the most dangerous place for an African American child is in the mother's womb, right? It also came with this crazy legislation that was also rolling through our state houses, right? Sex selection bans and all of the different things that were coming down in the 2010s, where Black women had been telling people from the very beginning that the train is on the tracks, and if we are not paying attention, then we are going to start losing in a major way. And we have now seen where that train has led us, right? So this was a narrative opportunity for us to shift the culture for Black women who were starting to see these crazy racialized attacks on our reproductive lives. So yes, that was powerful in the moment. It combated the crazy billboards. It was used in terms of us pushing back on legislation. But it also was a gateway for us to start to build partnerships and to build deeper relationships and to broaden the table of RJ in an intersectional way. So what has that now done for us in terms of like using this as our entry point to do this in a cultural intervention kind of way? One, we were able to start to build ties with those who are doing Black liberation work, right? That allowed us to open up the door to how we talk about Black Lives Matter at that time in 2014. It opened up the door for us to think about how we start to build more strategic partnerships with the movement for Black lives. That has now opened up doors for how we think about moving in the civil rights spaces. Like, it has created a train, right, that has continued to move us in building deeper connections, that has allowed us to build more power as a movement. So in this political moment, what we saw were people who had never really put their voice or their organization's names to anything that was associated with repro anything, now doing that because they had a pathway to do that. So why am I using this as an example, right? Whenever we're in a particular political moment where it feels like all of the systems are crumbling around us, And we don't necessarily have a hold on how we can use policy to the best of our ability because we don't have the power in the places that we need it, then we have to understand that we have another way of moving, and that is through culture. And our culture is our most powerful weapon, and it's something that our opposition knows, which is why they have been trying to move it in the ways that they have. So how is it then, if we are talking about two movements and two frameworks of RJ and birth justice that gives us a solid way of thinking about how we organize, how do we now make sure that more people are able to understand what this framework is, see themselves reflected in it, and then be able to move in the ways that we need them to move, right? So I want to make sure I give time for Paris. But the last piece I wanted to bring in around this too is year before last, the reproductive justice movement went into what we called a process on creating new visions for the reproductive justice movement, right? It was at a time when the Dobbs decision had just dropped. We were really thinking about what do we need to do as a movement to really reset ourselves and how we are moving towards a vision and a future. And what came out of that was something very powerful. This happened at a time where we were bringing all of our RJ leaders together, right, across all of our different communities. And what was very clear about what was needed in that room is that we were clear that our focus and that our North Star is that we are all working towards what liberation means for us, right? That we are going to root and ground our organizing, whether it's in indigenous communities, whether it is in Latin American communities, whether it is in API communities, our Black folks, we are all pointing towards the same message. And that is going to require, these things are dying. So wild. But what that is going to require is that every community and every person that was at that table realized that the way that they needed to communicate what RJ was needed to look different for their communities, right? And so that was what made us really think about, like, so we have to really put a lot more emphasis on culture shift as a strategy in order for us to be able to think about how we shape our futures, because the future is the culture, right? In my humble opinion. And if we do not have a hold on what that is, and if we're not using that strategically, then these powerful frameworks that we have of RJ, of birth justice, of the way that we think about the intersectionality of a thing is going to not necessarily have the same amount of power that we need it to if we do not have the culture to actually move with us to sustain whatever wins that we're all working towards collectively. So I want to dig into that more with you all. So I'm going to pass it to Paris so she can get into her piece, and then we can have a conversation together.
Yeah.
All right. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you, Sydney and Monica, for your offerings. And I'm really thinking about this question around seizing our destinies. And so, hey y'all, I'm Paris Hatcher. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm the founder and ED of Black Feminist Future. And I have to tell you, I am still buzzing from last night.
Oh my God.
Last night was like my Black
Pull me
Feminist
up.
Super Bowl, okay?
Yeah.
I need you to understand,
It's
I was
wild.
tearing up. I just could not believe it.
What's
So so much of the work that I do, I think of it, I mean, my goodness, the legacy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so thankful that we got to thank people, and I'm consistently thanking folks for what they have given us. So I'm really thinking about what was offered around folks sharing about their righteous fear and anger last night. I say that it is righteous because it makes sense, right? It's not, it is grounded. It's a grounded assessment to have fear and to be angry. But I'm coming to you feeling really steady and sure and to provide direction. I think now is the time to provide leadership, and I feel ready to provide that.
Yeah. Let's go.
So, I want to, again, I just give really gratitude to this space, and I really love being able to nerd out and really think about this idea about reproductive justice futurism. And I think about the future, I'm reminded of my legacy, and that the legacy of people who have futured me here, right? In the bow of the ship, in the wake, in the face of uncertainty, with the unimaginable and unbearable. I'm talking about generations and generations of like what are the most intense experience of chattel enslavement. And yet I am here. I'm a living testament to their hope and desire. So guess what, y'all? I can make it. We can make it 4 years.
Absolutely.
I mean, I just can, because there's like hundreds of years that have made me possible. I say that because I'm really, truly girded by that. Yes, it is terrible what we are experiencing, y'all, but oh my gosh, I just know my future is possible because the past made me possible. And yeah, I have to just lift that up. When I think about my past as the way of this futuring, I lift up, and I very rarely cite men, but I will cite, if never, Frantz Fanon's quote about every generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. That to me is really key to seizing our destiny into our futuring. And when I was thinking about these remarks, I started looking for a picture, and there's a picture of me on the Washington Mall at the March for Women's Lives in 2004. I was over 1 million people that was mobilized by the Loretta Ross to say no, to say no to the attacks of George W. Bush's attacks on women, to say no to the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan, to say no to the global gag rule, to say no to the Republican takeover of the Supreme Court. Does any of this sound familiar, y'all?
It's all the same.
I was 24 years old. I was a grad student at Clark Atlanta. I was new to Atlanta. I had been organizing for a while. I was on the bus with my best friend Jamara, who was just listed. Moya Bailey organized the bus.
Go Moya.
Okay, she was the president of the Feminist majority chapter at Spelman. I got on that bus because I was searching for something deep, a desire to live into what Fanon had asked us to fulfill or betray the mission. I knew that I was a Black feminist. I was trying to find my purpose. That march was transformative for so many of us. So there are the RJ mothers, and then there's the generation after us. There's us. So that's the me and the Jamara and the Latashas and the Monica's, who literally, that march changed our path. We came back home. We were like, this is our mission. We need to build RJ organizations on the state level. Nobody gave us money to do it. We weren't sure how to do it, but we, out of, again, relative obscurity, we built something. And it felt impossible, y'all, in 2004. It was a terrible election. It was mass uncertainty. We built something. 20 years later, we look back and we have an incredible Black RJ ecosystem with state-based organizations, movements, convenings, leaders. That is incredible. So in the face of uncertainty, we built something incredible. We will look back from this moment, I am clear, and be like, wow, we built something. So I think in order for us to seize our destinies, of course, we must root in our past and be encouraged by it and not give into it. Do not, as people have been saying, do not concede preemptively. Do not give up the faith. Don't give it up yet. But I actually think that as organizers, and that's the perspective that I'm going to offer, is that we have and we must take our work seriously. That organizing is not magic. It is not vibes. And I say that as someone who loves magic and vibes. But it is scientific, it is rigorous, it is practiced, and it is art. I will say that.
It is.
My comrade and my love talks about the work that we do as a movement science. So M. Adams, who's my comrade, and we do life and work and movement together, defines movement science as the application of scientific theory to the understanding of how structural change happens in society. So I think we must, as organizers, again, take it as serious as y'all researchers take it serious, as scientists, as surgeons. We are building and constructing a new society. So we must be rigorous. We must be anchored. And I would say we have to be anchored in 3 different ways. We have to be ideologically anchored, principally anchored and community anchored. You have to do all three. I am thrilled that we are talking about my ideological anchor. We've been lifting it up, Black feminisms. That is my ideological anchor. It is what guides me. And I will offer a definition. We all come from different operating definitions. But as an organizer, I love how much the South has been lifted up. Monica and I are both girls from North Carolina.
Hey.
That has been, I'm from the birthplace of the sit-ins. I'm from Greensboro, North Carolina. That changed me. Being born from a place of radical roots did something to me. It told me that everyday people could change the world. Black feminist changed me. Black feminisms is always pushing me. And as an ideology, we define it at Black Feminist Future as an ever-expanding ideology that helps Black people, and I would say offer all people, understand ourselves, our communities, and our world, right? That it allows us to examine and explain the relationships that exist between systems of power, in particular the intersections of race, gender, class, and on and on and on. As a blueprint, it allows us to understand that Black women, girls, and gender expansive people, our bodies and our identities are sites of struggle and joy, violence and power, exploitation and freedom. And when applied in our lives and within our communities and our organizations and movements, it offers us limitless possibilities for our collective liberation. To put it simply, Black feminism gets us free. At this time of unknowing, of uncertainty, I ask all of you, what are your ideological anchors? Because you must go back to it. Because it will be very easy to just go back into our identities. And I think that's everything that we've been pushing towards, is that in order to work cross lines of difference, cross movements, is that what are we going to be ideologically working towards, struggling towards? Because our identities are not enough. Because we know that our identities do not equal an analysis, right? We must develop our analysis. And that's what our ideology provides. So about our principles. So it's great to have an ideology, but how do you practice your ideology in real time? So what are your values and how do you live into them? And especially, it really matters, and I think, Loretta, you have been really lifting up, and your book offers this, is that, you know, it's great if you have an ideology, but if you're not showing up in how you live that out day to day, how you live your values, it really, you just become a person with great analysis, but you really ain't about it. There are too many of us who are really comfortable with being anchored in our ideologies, but don't treat people or themselves well. We do this work together, and that's just, we have to reiterate. So this isn't, I think also we have to, again, blow up false solutions. So I know some of my biggest movement heartbreak was that we come here to be best friends with each other. Just as an alert, you don't get to do that. I had to find that the hard way. You will find your lifelong comrades and your people, but not everyone will be that. But if you have an ideological where you're an ideology and your principles where you're anchored, it allows you to struggle in a different way.
That's it.
And that's important now, because we are going to, the election really showed us some things, and I think that's what Monica's offering, is that who are we talking to?
Who are we?
What are we saying? And is it getting smaller? So Loretta offers, like, are we becoming more cults to each other?
Listen.
Or are we building mass? Right? Yeah, like we do this work together, so how are we really moving together? And I think this is around being community anchored. And I think while we're in this explosion of the possibilities of social connections through the internet, which I love. I'm not on TikTok, but I am on Instagram, and I do enjoy that.
Me too.
Me
too. And TikTok.
I do think, though, we have to beware of the false solution of the individual actor.
Period.
So I do love individual activism. I think it's actually really important. But when people say, what should we do in this time? I will tell people you must join organization. that this idea, the overplaying of the individual, we do it together, y'all. And I think people keep wanting, like, where is our king? Literally, like, we want MLK. We need that soul voice. We need this. We have multiple leaders. So that gone to like the one leader is not gonna, that's never gonna really revisit. But I do want us to know that being an organization together lets us build real power, not build ego. So yes, join an organization or a community group, show up to the meetings, do the work, pay the dues, take on leadership, learn how to handle conflict, be willing to be undone and show back up over again. Again, I'm talking to y'all around, 2004. I'm still here. You're gonna work with people for the long.
Right.
You're gonna
Absolutely.
keep seeing people.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have to get that together. So yes, you have to be community anchored and resist the urge to allow people to put you on a pedestal. You have to resist it. You have to resist it.
Absolutely.
Who do you belong to and who claims you? That's actually my big question. So if anyone asks you, who are you organizing with? Who claims you? Who can actually vouch for you? So when I think about this thing around Black feminists preparing for the 21st century, from my reading, from my research, the movements from across the diaspora can always inspire me. African feminists, Caribbean feminists are my biggest, deepest teachers. I know that in order for us to sustain, when I look at the other movements that are moving across the world, how authoritarianism and fascism has been defeated has been through having a strong 21st century left feminist movement. In the United States, it must be, this is my analysis, led by Black feminists. We've had a feminist movement led by white women.
It does not work.
We're not doing that. Can be a part of. Again, there is a role. And I would say it needs to be led by Black feminisms as well. Because you can have Black feminists not led by Black feminisms. We can talk about that. We need to understand that we're in the position that we are today because the feminist movement in the United States has been put down, defamed, declawed, villainized. But I got my fangs, my claws. I think y'all do too. We're building. And BFF was founded with that in mind. Was founded because we need a vibrant left 21st century feminist movement. When asking what should we be clocking at this time, what are the dangers, the rise of, neoliberalism, the capitalization of, everything, the rise of conservatism, purity culture, the trad wife. It is not coincident, y'all. It is actually literally, and I have to tell myself this a lot. What we see is not just organic content. We have to know that our opposition is curating culture too.
Yes.
This trad wife, conservatism, purity.
Yes.
The young people are more conservative, more purist. I don't know if you've seen the new research around alcohol consumption, even sex, premarital sex. It's becoming more conservative. It's kind of like, what's going on? What's happened, right? Like we've got more technology so that you can have more safer sex than before. There's all these things, and now people are becoming more conservatism, more purity. This global anti-gender movement, the attack on trans bodies, sexuality, abortion access is global. So again, to lift up what Dazan and others saying, so should we. We must be global. We must resist girl boss feminism and choice feminism. So fight the individualism and the identity only. So I'm a boss. I'm a girl boss. I have my own business. I'm my own. We must resist it. We are at a time that we must heighten the contradictions because they are so apparent. You have a billionaire who's running this government. The contradictions around what even democracy means. Wow. I mean, we have to exploit them.
Yeah.
Now, this is something that we don't like to do because we like to kind of play nice. The left likes to play nice. I think we got to get dirty. And I think we have to use culture to do it. And so I'm going to conclude with that and open it back to y'all. So I do really believe we are in a really, I think, an exciting position
I do too.
at this time. And I think Black feminism is key to it in building out and seizing our destinies and continuing to advancing our future. So thanks, y'all.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Before I turn it over for discussion, which will go on, I just wanted to bring a couple of more names into the room. Because as you were talking, Monica, Paris, and Sydney, for some reason, Juanita Williams popped into my mind. And Juanita is one of those original founders of SisterSong, our original mistress of culture.
Yes, she was.
Right? All our quilts, all our stuff.
Very true.
But the reason Juanita popped into my mind was as an organizing story. Because Juanita was a quilter, knitter, down in rural South Carolina, Orangeburg, South Carolina. And she wanted to convince her predominantly white Christian grandmother's knitting circle to knit these hats for the Pink Pussy March. And when she asked them to do it, they all recoiled, like, we can't say that word. They weren't talking about the politics of the march. They were talking about these white grandmothers who couldn't say the word pussy without losing respectability. And so Juanita was not deterred.
At all.
Juanita's led them grandmothers in singing, "What's new, pussycat? Whoa, whoa, whoa." She said, singing that song, they knitted 200 hats.
The power of culture, good people.
And I'm just saying, what a brilliant organizing strategy
right.
that was. Using culture to cross what people thought were insurmountable political odds between a black feminist and white Christian grandmothers who were probably Trump supporters.
Yeah.
All at the same time. So I wanted to bring Juanita in because she also named SisterSong. So
did.
we need to bring her in. Another person I wanted to bring in is Gloria Anzaldúa. Because Gloria taught us that we as women of color, we as people of the drum, we love living in the land of ambiguity. And that is what's going to save us in the future.
Yeah.
The fact that we don't have to have absolute certainty to know that we're on the right path.
Yeah.
We know because it's us and because of who's got our backs, called our ancestors, that we gonna always be heading in the right direction. And so we don't have to see the destination to set up on the path.
Yep.
Which unfortunately is a shortcoming. The other thing Sherry Moraga said when she wrote this bridge called My Back. Don't let your past steal your present. That's another thing that we have to pay close attention to. Because what we've been through may not be all that we're going to have to go through in order to get to the other side. And so, and the last thing I'll stop with is calling another sister into the room, Faye Williams, from Sister Space and Books. Most of you probably don't know about Faye, but Faye started the first black feminist bookstore in America.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, called Sister Space and Books and stuff.
Okay.
And it was Faye who organized the Black Writers Conference at which I met Octavia Butler. Right. Faye brought Octavia to Crampton Auditorium, Howard University, and gave us all a chance to hear from this amazing sister. And I had a chance to ask her a question like fangirling and all of that kind of stuff.
Same thing.
But Octavia reminds us that in order to rise from its own ashes, a phoenix must first burn.